Ahoy! Joe Buddy Hambone here, and I'm back again with a brand new coupon code from our friends over at Noble Knight Games. This month, the code is LEGENDS. It's good for 10% off orders of $10 or more now through November 19th. Noble Knight has all your RPG back-to-school needs. One-stop shop, and whether it's board games, magic cards, books, dice, whatever it may be, Noble Knight is the place to be. Using the code LEGENDS, good for 10% off orders of $10 or more, running now through November 19th, you can set yourself up pretty pre-holidays with everything you need to run some games for your friends and your family. So next time you're checking out at Noble Knight Games, don't forget to use the code LEGENDS. Good for 10% off orders of $10 or more, running now through November 19th. From our friends over at Noble Knight Games.
This is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the founder and publisher of Unwinnable, Stu Horvath. And tonight we've got a very special guest. A little while back, we had Amanda Lee Franck on the show for a quick little elevator pitch, and we really wanted to be able to bring her back when we had the opportunity to really talk to her about her art style. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into this one. Amanda, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Well, I'm fantastic. I am even more so fantastic because I finally got eyes on the PDF of Vampire Cruise.
That's so cool. What did you think?
Well, I loved it. I loved it a whole lot. I will not try to undersell this to anyone when I talk about this because I think it's such a cool idea from front to back. And also the artwork in it is so good. It's got like such a vibe to it that I can't really explain, and it just feels exciting and fresh. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about it, though, in case they missed the elevator pitch episode? What's going on with Vampire Cruise?
So this was the game that I ran during quarantine for my high school friends. So it's basically just wish fulfillment. You and all of your friends get free tickets to go on a cruise. But it turns out the cruise has been planned and run by vampires, and it's up to you to band together and to try to protect the other passengers. There's some non-vampire threats that are sort of going on in the background, and there are lots of cruise activities that you can also take part in. When we played the game, we did a lot of describing exotic foods that you could eat there. And talking about the various cruise-related... I've never been on a cruise. So basically, it's about good times with your friends and killing vampires and defeating the sort of exploitative system.
What more could you ask from a vacation?
That's what I think. It's really all that I want. There are also rules if you want to play as employees of the cruise. Who have also, been convinced to go on this both wonderful and terrible journey. It's hopefully both fun and scary and like a fulfilling trip that you get to take where you both have access to incredible cooking and swimming pools and water slides. And also, you can do some good in the world, at least on a cruise ship.
Yeah, I mean, what would be better than endless mimosas at brunch and then a little bloodletting on the Lido deck?
That's the idea. There's a dance club. I put in the possibility that maybe there's a big showdown in a dance club. If you're in the crew, you might end up having to DJ it. If you're a passenger, you might get invited there. If you get turned into a vampire in the course of the game, well, then maybe you're just there having fun. But it's the product of a time when I extremely missed being around a lot of people, something that I rather still miss. And just, I don't know, the wonder and the joy of playing a game with your friends. That's kind of what's driving the game for me as the writer and as the original person running it. So
it's very cool. I looked at the art, and the first thing that jumped to my mind was Charles Addams.
Oh, nice. I'm so
Yeah.
glad to hear that. I was looking at a lot of illustrators from like the 20s and the 30s. A lot of my drawing is very sketchy and weird, I think, and I was trying consciously to clean things up a little bit for this one. I hope that it comes across as a good fit for the text and kind of brings the whole feeling of the adventure together.
There's one illustration in particular that I love. I think you posted it on Instagram where it's the vampire with the umbrella and like the mosquito netting, like hanging out on the deck. And I think that is sort of like a perfect encapsulation of the experience.
I'm so glad you like that one. I thought it was a very funny idea.
I also love the fact that it's so food centric. I was just talking to my family earlier today about my Call of Cthulhu game, which is we've been running Horror on the Orient Express. And so much of that game has been food centric. It's like we get to the hotel, what's for dinner, what's for brunch? And like people look up these hotels like historically are still there. So they look up the menus of the hotels now. And then we have like these long conversations about like the sumptuous meals that they're eating instead of like going investigating.
I think that's really a key element of a lot of genre stuff, especially like detective stories or to a certain extent horror stories. Like you'll have these narratives where like there's a murder or a mystery or something bad is happening, but the lives of the people who are investigating it are very aspirational or luxurious. So you, the reader, both get to inhabit this world where, like the Thin Man novels, like your protagonists are incredibly rich and they have wonderful clothes, but it's 1930. So there's also this underworld that they go into and you get to kind of live in both things as the reader. I think like in times of hardship, that fantasy is really powerful. And I like it definitely was comforting to me to kind of inhabit that last year. I think something else about this game that is to me running it as the GM that was incredibly fun is getting to be a lot of different vampires. It's great. I super recommend it. There's so many vampire cliches, and I tried in writing it to just give just enough to the GM to be like, oh, it's this kind of vampire, or it's this other kind of vampire. I don't need to think too hard about it. I just get to have fun playing this role as like to the greatest extent possible. It's a delight. You just get to be the bad guy, but in like 8 different ways.
Yeah, it's definitely vibrant and fresh and spirited. And that's the kind of thing where I think with a lot of gameplay styles and a lot of different styles of games, if you will, there's always that bit that kind of gets lost in the translation from the page to the game runner and then to the table. This reads so perfectly because as a game master, there is a wellspring of cool different ideas. Like some people might go to the dining hall for ladyfingers, but the vampire's idea of ladyfingers is something completely different. So you get to really play with it. You get to really kind of bring out a lot of color to the story by just inhabiting the world. And I think that's such a cool thing. I thought it was so refreshing, and I can't wait to run it myself.
Oh, thanks so much. As someone who hasn't made that many games, I was so scared about this one. It's the second one. And in a way, like working on the other game that's going to be out, Mouth Brood, at the same time, that was the only thing that kept me from totally melting down, because it's like, okay, it's not just the second thing I've ever done. There's actually the third thing I've ever done, and they'll be out at about the same time. So, maybe not everyone will be like, oh, this is such a disappointment.
Let's pivot for a second to Mouth Brood, because Mouth Brood is a very different experience than Vampire Cruise.
Yeah, it's like exactly in the opposite direction. So Mouth Brood is like straight horror. It's in the tradition of The Thing. It's a little bit like Annihilation. It's sort of biological horror. Like I will read this novel over and over again or watch this movie over and over again. A bunch of scientists venture into a mysterious location. They don't know anything about it, and they don't even necessarily understand what they see there at the end of the movie or book or game. It just remains this huge, terrifying mystery, and I love that stuff.
I'm right there with you. I have to say that the cover of this is just like, it hits this perfect sweet spot of like kind of like a modern take on like an older pulpy kind of style. It's like distinct, but also like leaves a lot of room to the imagination. I love it so much. The limited palette does so much work. This is so good. And flipping through it, the art is amazing. I'm so jazzed on this.
Thank you. Tons of credit to the graphic design team from Games Omnivorous. It wouldn't look nearly as cool if it wasn't for them. I put the words in and the artwork, and they made it look incredible.
They're ridiculous, right? Like all of their stuff is just absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, I haven't seen the like physical copies yet, but it's going to be so beautiful. You know, when it's all like printed on the nice paper with the fold out map and everything.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't wait.
It's elegant. You know, I will say that if there's a word I could use to describe it, dear listener, as I'm reading through it, it's elegant. You know, a lot of RPGs often feel like 10 pounds of shit in a 5-pound bag. You know, like there's so much text, so many different colors, so many other things going on that it's almost hard to really read, understand, and absorb what's happening in the book between the pages. Yet with something like this, you know, when you all get your hands on it, you'll see that this is just something that is delightful to read. I'm reading it on a PDF right now. I know that once I get it in my hands, it's going to be a very satisfying reading experience for me because you're right, Amanda. They really laid this thing out beautifully. It actually almost looks like an art magazine more than it does an RPG. And I think that's a huge strength and something I definitely would like to see more of in modern RPGs.
It's funny how the art almost is a PDF, so that like there's not even paper here, but it has like a texture to it that you can just see. You can imagine what the paper is going to feel like underneath it, which is super cool. There's design constraints for this series, right?
Yes, this is part of their Manifestus Omnivorous series, part of the reason that it is elegant. Not me. I had to follow this really like generative set of instructions. Like it can only be up to 6,666 words long, the coolest number of words.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to only have one monster rule, which I think I probably broke. But, you know, if you're going to break a rule, you should break it really hard. And it has to involve either bone eating or mushroom eating. There's more of them. They're great. They're great rules. And they have a bunch of other really beautiful books that are in this series. And they all are completely different in style. And it's a really, really cool, like artistic set of RPGs. And I feel like the sort of following these rules helped me make something that was really different. It's a weird game to play. It doesn't really like run like anything that I've run before, just because of the format of going into this place where everything is totally new. There's not a dragon. Like, you know, everyone knows what a dragon is like. Everyone knows what a gelatinous cube is like. And this is mostly a bestiary, and all of the animals in it are, to a certain extent, somewhat indescribable. They have to show people the pictures. There's a suggestion that as your players like navigate through the landscape, they name these creatures because they've never been seen before. And when you're running it, the thing that happens is it's so packed with animals and plants and like the relationships between the animals and plants. Like the first hex you go into, because it's hex crawl, you spend a lot of time as the game runner saying, okay, you see this thing, it's like nothing you've ever seen before. Here's what it's doing. Here's the sound it makes. It's aggressive or it's not aggressive. It's doing this certain thing at this time. And so at first, you spend a lot of time describing the place to the people who are playing the game. But by the time you're in the second hex, your players start seeing things they've seen before. And so they very quickly develop like this mastery of the landscape. And it starts becoming really pleasing because you're learning. They're like, oh, we saw this back there, but now it's here and we know what to expect. And so it gets like just, I don't know, the way it generates stories, I think works really well.
It's definitely cool because now knowing this, like I see the names of the creatures and I'm taking this as these are just kind of suggestions so the game runner has a foothold in like, okay, you know, I mean, granted, try describing the Ravis Ferosa, you know, like I can't, but I think that there is something really cool about the way a game runner would have to try to describe that, because that's a challenge because it's not a dragon, you know, it's not something that people who play these games have seen before. So it seems like a lot of fun trying to describe that to your players and then seeing what they name it.
Right. Yeah. It's just like a whole new world that's very cramped and full of creatures, and they're very dangerous. um, a lot of this was inspired by, like, I love biology. I love watching nature documentaries. I grew up on, all of the works of David Attenborough. And so pretty much all of the stuff in here, the wildest creatures and the craziest things that they do, or the kind of lives that they lead, it's all inspired by stuff that really happens in the world. There are horrible interactions and parasites, and like you can get some pretty messed up diseases if you're not careful enough. But it's all based in reality. This is all stuff that on a small scale, something like that happens in the real world. The sort of horror of knowing like the brutality of nature, but the fact that while being brutal, it's also fascinating and kind of like wondrous at the same time. Like there's stuff that's really, really beautiful, but it's also really deadly. And so I don't know, that sense of wonder is kind of what I was trying to capture, and hopefully is what the experience that you would have as a player of the game.
So coming up, having really enjoyed the works of David Attenborough, do you feel like that impacted the way you approach designing some of these creatures in something like In the Light of a Faded World? Because, there is a very certain kind of primal ground view of what those animals experience, right?
That's absolutely true. This week, I've been working on a set of illustrations for In the Light of the Faded World. I redid these drawings. They were just meant to be views of various biomes that you might play the game in. I got so stuck because I was doing these drawings and it'd be, like a montane environment with like mountains and pine trees and stuff. And I drew it and I was like, this isn't right. What's wrong? And I finally figured it out. I was drawing it. I was using photographs that I had taken like on a road trip from years back. And I was drawing it from a human height.
Oh, there you go.
Didn't look right. I switched them all so that you were at ground level or you were in a tree and you were looking through tree branches, and then it just clicked. It's totally a change in perspective. And it's a really interesting thing to try to illustrate because the animals have, they have human characteristics, but they're definitely animals. They're not like using tools like you might see in Mouse Ritter or any of the like kind of very cute animal focused games. They're really animals. So thinking about that, thinking about one's own personal landscape, one of the things that's really cool in that game is that if you're running the game, it encourages you to run it in your like hometown, which is a wild thing to think about. And something else I did when I was working on some of the earlier illustrations is I took a walk around Chicago and took photographs of where I live. And then I went home and I drew the animals, and then I just like degraded the city even farther to like, what is the bike trail that I walk down going to look like after people have gone and stuff has really grown over it and the concrete's crumbled more than it already is. And it feels interesting. It feels like it's mournful, but also not entirely like hopeless because the animals are surviving, the land is surviving, and it's going to be a really interesting game. It's got a short story attached to it that Zedek Siu wrote, and I've gotten to read that already. It's beautiful. It's so good.
He's one of those people who's like, everything he writes is so good and I hate it because it's just, I'm so jealous. Like it seems so effortless for him. And
yeah, it's aspirational. I'm running the Thousand Islands for my gaming group, and we're having such a good time. I was going to do one of them, like just one of the booklets, and we got off track, and now we're on like number 2, and it's going to be this long campaign because nobody wants to stop. It's just really, really good.
The Thousand Islands, people are constantly like talking to me about doing zines, like how do you focus it and like campaign settings as zines and stuff. And I'm just like, just pick up Thousand Islands and flail around trying to do that because like he does it perfectly, just so fantastic and unbeatable. Absolutely unbeatable. We're so lucky to have those in the world.
It's really true. And there's not a like set adventure in them. There's just people and locations and everything is knit together. And it's shockingly easy to just sit down at the table and run something from them. It just gives you exactly what you need. Like I did the first session without really prepping anything and it just worked. It was wild.
And that's the first book. We're totally getting off track. That's the Crocodile City?
No, we're in the Crocodile City now. We started in Corvu, which is this sort of like Sometimes it's flooded and sometimes it's not, and there's all of these war barges.
Oh, okay.
Now we're in the Crocodile City, and the Crocodile City has a dungeon crawl, sort of like it's built on top of this like ancient civilization that dug out all of these old temples that are flooded that you can go down into to get artifacts. So for the dungeon crawl, because I don't have time to make a map right now, I decided I wanted to just like run some like, you know, really old traditional D&D stuff in there. I'm running the Caverns of Thracia for the dungeon part. It's perfect. It's really great.
That's great. That's awesome.
It fits in perfectly because of the like old religion stuff that's in original zine. So I'm just kind of like, as we go through, I'm just kind of like knitting them together, and it's incredible.
Man, I gotta get Zedek on here so I could just like fawn over him and his work.
Yeah, and usually when we do episodes like this, it's just Stu and I just fawning over people that we admire. So we gave you 7 minutes the last time, and now you're getting the full half hour for us to say, hey, we really like your work.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. There are so many people who are making work that's inspiring me. So it's cool to get to talk about them because I'm still really learning how to do this stuff. I'm trying really hard to make the best work I can, and I'm still so early in the process that, like, I don't know, everything I do seems like the first time I've done it.
You're doing such a great job, and you're part of a larger tapestry of people who are just doing such amazing work right now. And like, it doesn't have to be like huge work. The Thousand Islands is a large amount of material now, but each one's just an individual zine, but they each contain multitudes. And the same is true of your work and countless other folks, like the Rainy City people. Like, everybody's just making these amazing little gemstones. We're in a lucky time.
I really feel that way too. I feel so grateful that like I made my like one thing and people got excited about it and then like invited me into the bigger world. I'm really socially anxious, so it's hard for me to like reach out and promote myself and stuff. But I don't know, the RPG world is super welcoming and everyone has been amazing. Just even little things like the paper mini jam. I did 15 little paper minis. I've never made them before. This, illustrator organized it. There were people from like all over different parts of the games world got really excited about it, and everyone made all of this super cool work. You can like print out if you need some minis. You like look up the paper mini jam on itch, and there's tons of stuff like little crow guys and little like skeleton warriors and stuff, and they're all amazing.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, it definitely feels like a legitimate scene. Like, it definitely feels like, and not like the scene in the way that like, the Jersey scene was back in like the early 2000s, a bunch of cutthroats. However, it feels like there are people who are like, we just like creating stuff and we like elevating other people who create stuff. So let's create stuff together. And I think that's super cool.
Yeah, it's really exciting to be a part of. There's more work out there that's good than I can read in a lifetime. I think that's great. I think that's really good. There's something for everyone.
So speaking of something for everybody, a lot of your work is available, and I want to tell our listeners where they could find it. So I know that the print version of Vampire Cruise isn't out yet, but where can they get the PDF?
So you can find the PDF of Vampire Cruise on itch.io. My name on itch is Amanda Lee, all one word, but you can also just look up Vampire Cruise on itch and it's available to download. There's community copies. Feel free to avail yourself of those as well.
And what about Mouthbrood?
So Mouthbrood is put out by Games Omnivorous, so you'll be able to find that on their website. I'm pretty sure there will be print copies available to order from them, or I know Exalted Funeral carries their stuff really often, so I would guess that you could find it there as well. It's going to be a very, very beautiful print book, but there's going to be a PDF too.
And by the time this episode airs, the Mouse Ritter Kickstarter will be over, but you are doing something for that, correct?
Yeah, I wrote a little adventure for Mouse Ritter, and they have an extremely successful Kickstarter that's up right now. They also got nominated for an Emmy.
Oh, good for them.
Yeah, cool. It's rad. It's a great game. I had a really good time playing it. They're like one-page format adventures are really great to run. They're really tight. And you have this like one sheet of paper, so you can sit down and not do any prep and just like run it for your friends, and it works perfectly because everything is right there. You don't have to flip around looking for like a little map or a bit of information. It's a really great format.
Awesome. So Amanda, it's been amazing chatting with you. Is there anything else you'd like to promote before we go home?
No, I think that's it. I think that's everything right now. More stuff to come, though.
Dear listener, I cannot implore you enough. Definitely keep your eyes open for everything Amanda Lee Franck. This has been another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. Stu, where can people find you?
They could find me on Instagram at Vintage RPG, posting stuff by Amanda Lee Franck.
So there you go. Easy plug and topical. I love it.
There you go. Yeah.
You can find me on the Twitter and on Instagram at John McGuire RPG. I've been posting more and I will be posting more. 3-2-1 Action Rocket to Russia is out online. You can find it on itch.io. It will be available sometime before this episode airs in physical copies on Exalted Funeral. So definitely check out my RPG there. If you love the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe because your reviews really do help other listeners to find us. If you really love the show, why not become a patron? Over on patreon.com/vintagerpg. We've got early release episodes. We got a behind-the-scenes look at Stu's book, still tentatively titled Experience Points. We got a look at my RPGs, 3-2-1 Action, the first adventure, Rocket to Russia, and everything else going to be coming out for Action. We also have some videos. We got some cool things coming up that we can't really talk about yet, but we're going to be putting some cool things into play there as well. We've got a killer Discord community that we'd love for you to be a part of, patreon.com/vintagerpg. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dego West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.